What's up, guys? So, piggybacking off of a video that I saw on YouTube, I wanted to ask the question, what does Noah's Day look like? You know, does it look like something that we see today? So, is the last days, does it look like this? You know, and why I asked that question is because many of us, you know, we sometimes wonder what Noah's Day actually looked like, you know, and especially if people really, you know, take a literal approach to the Bible. God told us that the last days would look like Noah's Day. Now, it's interesting because, you know, in America, you don't every day see, you know, civil unrest all the time, you know, like there are some parts of America that are still functioning like, you know, everything's normal. And so, you know, I wonder if we have to break the mold of what we are expecting end days to look like, you know, and I say this because there's sometimes people, even in the church, asking the question of, are we in the last days? And so that's the only reason I would even bring it up, is because, you know, we sometimes have a misunderstanding about what the last days looks like. And so the Bible declared the last days. It's a time period. It's not necessarily a literal phrase. Okay, so let me explain it a little bit. When talking about the word last days, from a biblical standpoint, it's not how we think of days. So when we think of like, hey, there's 7 days in a week, you know, we have our own thinking towards, you know, days. So when you ask people, hey, do you believe we're in the last days? Their thinking of it could mean, oh, you mean like, you know, do we have 7 days left until the world ends? And so their understanding of your word choice could actually be a misunderstanding. And you don't think that people think like that, but they actually do. People have, you know, different ways of thinking. And so I think we in the church have to explain that the last days does not mean literally we're saying that we only have weeks to live, or we only have weeks until Jesus comes back. Guys, on the prophetic calendar, there is still 1,000 years until we get to the new heavens and the new earth. Okay, so there's still, prophetically, Jesus is going to reign for 1,000 years on the earth before it is destroyed. And so that's what most of the Christian church believes. And in kind of non-denominational churches, maybe Baptist, maybe, you know, now there's other branches of Christianity that have their own belief about it. And I'm talking about, so God said there has to be fractions within the church in order for people who have a call in their life by God to really stand out. So I'm not talking about the unpopular people, you know, is basically how God puts it. There's popularity and then there's unpopularity in the Christian church. And so how it works is that, sometimes people who have a more solid biblical teaching are exalted more within the church because their solid message gets out to people. Now, that's not always the case. There's definitely people that are exalted that, have things wrong in their teaching, but it's not so, obvious. Within the Christian church, we have our own list of kind of people who are big in the church. We have our own list of what you would call celebrities type of thing within the church. You have people in the Bible, right? That, some are more, popular than other people in the Bible. Like Joseph might be a more popular person than maybe Jabez in some cases. Now, I'm just talking strictly on, how to kind of recognize the teaching that is strong when it comes to end times. And so I said all that to say that, the last days have to do with a time period. It's not necessarily a literal day. And I think most of us do know that. But, you'd be surprised that you do have to break down some things that we call simple and break it down. And so, many people can misunderstand, what God means when he says last days. Because 2,000 years have passed since Jesus said that we were in the last days. So, if it's been 2,000 years since Christ has been on the earth, which most scholars agree with that, then, the last days was 2,000 years. It's been 2,000 years of the time period of the last days. So it really represents a time frame that we don't know how long the last days are going to last. For example, it took 100-something years for Noah to even build his ark. And so it was 100 years back then. Now, for something as big as God transitioning to the millennial reign of Christ, it could possibly take longer. So, that's an explanation for asking the question, what exactly does the last days look like? And so, it's not going to look familiar to us, is my opinion, okay? The days that we live in, we know what normal looks like, but it's starting to, and more each day, it's already becoming not normal. But it takes time for us to get to the point where God intervenes, guys, and casts the world into the tribulation. So, it may be helpful if I do a timeline. It's always good to be reminded. Max Lucado did this, it's always good to do a timeline. There's many pastors that will do a timeline for the end times, and that may be helpful right now. So, we have what I believe different versions of the same belief that of Christ returning in the church. Most of us believe that Christ is going to return to this earth. And so my personal belief is what Christians call the beginning rapture, like the rapture at the beginning of what we call the sequence starting of the end of the last days. So basically, the rapture is going to happen at the beginning of what we would say the tribulation is. Tribulation is just a word that is used to describe how bad it's going to get on the earth. So don't get us wrong. When the last day starts, it is an end of life event. So even though the earth won't be destroyed fully, it's going to be destroyed on the surface, and on different levels, it's going to be destroyed. So, let me explain something else. Yes, technically there could be days left in the way that we initially understand the word days. There could be 7 days left or something. But there also could be 107 days left. So we biblically don't know when exactly the start of the end of life event happens. But let me explain another thing. We believe that when the tribulation is over, Jesus rebuilds the world and he reigns on the earth for 1,000 years. What we as Christians call the millennium. Now, this is one of those, when you get into a lot of end times topics, there's a lot of things that we kind of can sometimes disagree on in the church. But most of us believe in a 1,000-year reign of Christ on this earth, and the church ruling and reigning with Jesus Christ. And that's the start of what we call creation number 3. So after Jesus reigns for 1,000 years on this earth, then that is the point where we get to the actual destruction of the earth. So, technically, when people are saying the last days, my whole point is just get an understanding of what they actually mean when they say last days. Also, the end of life event, what we call the tribulation, can happen, technically start at any moment, but we don't know exactly what it will look like when it actually starts, guys. So even though I came on YouTube and I was like, hey, this person's video talking about, we're possibly in the tribulation already. We're not in the tribulation. Well, okay, the reason why he's able to even make a video like that is because we don't know exactly what it looks like when the tribulation starts. We know when it starts as far as what it starts in Revelation chapter 6. If you open your Bible and you go to the book of Revelation and you go to chapter 6, that is what we believe is the start of events happening on this earth that we call end of life events, or no one really calls it that in the Christian church. We call it tribulation, the tribulation. Or some, maybe mistakenly, may call it the last days. And so, that's just something that I felt like I wanted to go over in this particular podcast. And so the first seal, when Jesus opens the first seal in heaven, which translates to something happening on earth, that looks like, it says a conqueror goes out conquering and basically, winning many battles. But if you read when Jesus opens the first seal, this is for all the Bible nerds out there. You can't fully explain what it actually means other than a few scenarios. Some scholars think that it means there is World War III, the start of World War III. Some scholars think it's a political war. So they think this man called the Antichrist, or the leader of the people that are against God and against Jesus Christ, they think he might politically make moves to start a one world government. In general, those are the two options that we believe can be the start of the tribulation. Not necessarily the event of the rapture. Some scholars do believe the rapture could be connected to it, but the Bible, if you really read it, it doesn't necessarily say that the tribulation is the start of, the rapture, is the start of the tribulation. It doesn't necessarily say that. So, this is just an example, guys, of how kind of complicated the Bible can really get, like how complex it is. When you really think about it, when you really look at the details, guys, and when you really look at things that God is telling us that pertains to our life or our death, it's worth studying, guys. It's worth studying the Bible. That's why I'm in Bible college, to study the Bible, because there's a lot to know. Now, one stance you can take, though, which I semi-recommend, is just waiting to see what happens. So instead of looking at all the minute details all the time, instead of looking at the minute details, you can wait to see what happens and put your trust in Jesus Christ. But for those in the church that do like to know a little bit more of details, the details are there, guys, if you want to figure out what the details are. But some of it you do kind of have to wait and see what it looks like. And that's why I recommend preparing for different scenarios that can happen. I was talking with my dad, and he was like, I just don't see a point in preparing. And many Christians are like this, guys, where they want to just put all of their faith and hope in the rapture, which I totally agree with. I'm not saying my dad was necessarily wrong. All I'm saying is, for the Christians that do have more of a physical preparedness for end of days events, it's worth getting prepared rather than, just saying, hey, I've read the Bible and I understand there's a rapture. The only problem that I have with it is that there are many people that are Christians, guys, that are not necessarily bad Christians from the little interaction that I may have with them. They're not necessarily bad Christians when you just look at them. And so for them to not even see the rapture, guys, for them to not even believe that there is a pre-trib rapture, but they're still, as far as we know, in the body of Christ. That's something that we have to take note of. If we all want to be unified, guys, and you have some people in the Christian church saying one thing, and you have another person saying another thing, and as long as it's not, blatant, outright, bad doctrine, it's something to take note of. So if there's some people saying, oh, there's not a rapture, or they're saying, oh, there's not a pre-trib rapture, then we should prepare accordingly. And that's the one thing that, I was trying to explain to my dad, was that, yeah, I was one that did, believe in just the rapture. But guys, if you're a young person, you grew up, you were born, and you didn't know about any of these end time stuff, guys. It wasn't our, when you're young, you're thinking about all sorts of other things other than preparing for the end times. And so, I'm just learning about all of this stuff, like back in, 2017, 2018, I'm just learning about end time stuff way back then. And guys, many of us are underprepared on different levels, guys, on different levels. And so thanks so much for, checking out this particular podcast. Hopefully this was helpful to someone. Honestly, I can go into more detail, but I'm going to wait to do that on maybe if we start broadcasting on television or on our Sunday nights or Wednesday Bible studies. I can go into more detail and take longer. But, I'm driving right now. I'm just, kind of wanted to make it a shorter one. But guys, if you want a full explanation of end times, which I think is worth doing, guys, like, it doesn't necessarily have to be long, but I can do a full explanation guide to end times, and I'll offer it for a low price. So I will try to go through everything, guys, and I mean everything that we could think of on end times, and we can talk about, every little question and answer and all of that. And so I think this is needed. And so thanks so much, guys. Talk to you soon.